Thank you for watching Conscious Consumer Network. The live stream broadcast is free to view. You can pause and rewind live broadcasts to catch up, or view shows at a later date by accessing our free archives of all shows. Check out our broadcast guide to see what's on. You can show your support by donating to our network support fund. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or subscribe to the monthly newsletter for updates. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. Be inspired by the voices of visionaries, changemakers, and ordinary, extraordinary people who do what they do, all for the love of learning.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. I'm Lady Liberty, and this is episode number 104. In this episode, we're going to explore dropping out of high school. What do you think when you hear the term high school dropout? There's a social stigma attached to the term, and images of struggling, unsuccessful people come to mind. But this social programming is intentional, as it's meant to guarantee people don't seek an alternative and stay in school for their own good. The message is reinforced through scare tactics, promising that high school dropouts will never have the earning potential that of their high school graduate counterparts. The U.S. Census statistics tells us that 38% of high school dropouts fall below the poverty line, compared with 18% of total households in every demographic. We are meant to believe that earning a high school diploma is the magic ticket to higher earnings. And even if that was a fraction of the truth, the statement is meant to support the argument that high school is necessary to having a future. However, most statistics don't talk about those who opt out of the system. Opt out is the key word. Do they have a future? Why do they drop out? What do they do instead? What are some of the side effects of dropping out of high school? Are there opportunities for those that don't go to high school? And will they always be forced to be living below the poverty line? Does dropping out actually preserve dropouts' love of learning? And what other side effects are those for those that drop out of high school? We're going to address these questions and more with an incredible panel tonight, and I'm really excited to get this conversation started. But first, I'm going to briefly introduce each of our panelists, and I want to remind our audience that you can find out more about each of our panelists on the show notes page located at fortheloveoflearningshow.com, and look for the show notes page for episode number 104. There you will find more information about each of our panelists, links to their projects and websites. first, I'd like to introduce you to John. John is a national advocate for dyslexia and the founder of Think Lexic, a nonprofit organization serving the dyslexic community. John graduated from UC Berkeley and spent 1 year as a visiting scholar at Harvard University. He is the author of High School Dropout to Harvard and featured in the PBS film about dyslexia called Being You. John founded Think Lexic to drive advocacy and use the arts to empower kids with dyslexia. He holds a master's degree in education with a focus on learning disabilities. He is interested in visual thinking and education innovation. And he lives in Claremont, California with his wife and daughter. So welcome to tonight's panel, John.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I look forward to this, having a really great conversation with everyone.
Me too. Next, I'd like to introduce you to Siren. Siren has always disliked school. His disdain for it seemed to grow the longer he was stuck in school. When he reached high school, he got to a breaking point. He started skipping school and sleeping in, faking that he was sick and slack on the work he would get on the days he did show up. Siren ended up dropping out in late 2012 in what would have been grade 11. But due to his excessive absences the previous year, he was going to be held back. And that's what sealed the deal. During his time he was skipping school, Siren discovered the school survival forms, and that's when he learned of alternatives. Homeschooling and unschooling stood out to him, especially because he wanted to be done with the academia and stay home full-time working on becoming an entertainer. Unfortunately, his parents vehemently opposed homeschooling no matter how Siren presented it and forced him to go to school until he ended up dropping out. I know you've got quite a story. So welcome to tonight's panel, Siren.
Thank you for having me, and I look forward to talking with everyone about dropping out of school.
We are looking forward to it too, and I just want to apologize to our audience. Siren doesn't have a webcam installed, so we're going to be entertained by his beautiful voice. We'll come back to you in just a little bit and learn more about you. Thanks, Siren.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce you to Monica. Monica dropped out of high school at the end of her junior year as well and began unschooling. In 2008, she wrote about this decision for Life Learning magazine in an article entitled Daring to Drop Out, which is where we found you, actually. She then went to college and later graduate school, where she earned a master's degree in elementary education. She has been an educator for the last 10 years and cites unschooling as a strong influence in her pedagogical practice. So welcome to tonight's panel, Monica.
Thank you so much for having me, Lainey. Thanks for thinking of me and finding me.
You're very, very welcome. And I have to say, I read your article sometime in 2008, and I'm just so thrilled that you're a part of tonight's panel. And it's interesting that you went into a formal education through higher education, and I'm sure we're going to learn more about that. So yeah, we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So thanks.
Of course.
And finally, I'd like to introduce you to Stephen. But actually, Stephen is going to introduce himself. He is our final panelist tonight, and he's going to share a little bit about his background. And hopefully, Stephen, that'll segue into why you've been invited to be on tonight's panel and why dropping out of high school is something that you are here to talk about and dare I even say passionate about. So the floor is yours, Stephen.
Oh, well, thanks, and very nice to meet you. My name is Stefan. I think I'm like the youngest one here out of, everyone, like everyone's in their like late 30s or 20s, so, I'm the only adolescent here. But yeah, hello. I dropped out in 2015, November 11th, when I turned 16. But before that, like I had a lot of like, issues with the authorities, and just a lot of bickering and, talking back and then like I didn't do so well like in school at the point, and then I just didn't go to school after that, and then I just slept in, and I had a whole bunch of like other issues. And that kind of led me to drop out when I was 16, and I had like a huge talk with the school people, the day when I dropped out. Does anyone have any questions towards me, or I don't really have much to say, to be honest.
Oh my gosh, I have so many questions for you, Stephen.
Okay.
So you dropped out when you were 16, and that was, you said, 2 years ago?
Well, not 2 years. It's almost going to be 2 years, but yes, almost 2 years.
So tell me, you went through school your entire years before that. You were schooled. You didn't come from a homeschooling background.
No. That's the exact opposite. Like I come from an East Asian culture background. Like where Asian people have like a real good trust and like faith in the public school system. Dating back thousands of years ago, like in China with like the civil entrance exams and stuff like that. And like, and if you read news about like South Korea, like how insane they are about like, studying, just like going to the best universities possible, like just killing themselves, to the point of child abuse,
Wow. So in the beginning, when I spoke a little bit about the social programming, I was really speaking of it from the perspective of the United States.
Oh.
That's what I know.
No, but no, I am very American. I grew up here in America, but like even then, I have 2 Korean parents. One is really good at English, and one not so much. But yeah, but Korean Americans or second generation Koreans, do very well in school.
So, but you had to overcome the social stigma
within my Korean American circle group. Yeah. It's a very Christian based, like the main foundation for like, Korean immigrants is through, the church, because it has to do a lot with, cause like Christian values of like, family and like obedience, kind of like, favors, Korea with like, their hierarchy and like, the language they speak and the way that you address to adults, and it's not like here, like in America, where it's like very casual and we could speak like each other to at an equal level. It's not like that at all, in Korea.
So can you talk a little bit about what's happened to you in your life over the last 2 years, maybe within your own family and within your own mode of thinking about the choices that you made?
Yes, I can share that. I think about, well, like over these periods, I think I've actually benefited, and I like, gained like got really like, healthy again for myself, like I used to be like, suffer from like I was like in like case way for like heart disease and like diabetes, but then like ever since then, like those 1.5 years, I dropped, a lot of weight, and I had the time, to like, eat healthy, not only that, but like, I learned a lot about, gaming and like, PC building and the hardware, and just, learning about those things and like current game news or like, just like computer markets and stuff.
So would you say that unintentionally you became a self-directed learner after you got out of high school, after you left the school system?
Well, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think everyone like is like self-directed learning their whole entire life, whether it's like just through their hobbies or stuff like that. It's just that like because of not going to school, I was able to be given a lot of free time and just focus on like on what I really like, and that's video games.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. And I'm so glad that you got yourself out of school and your health is back on track. And I look forward to learning so much more about your story. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And so why don't we pop on over to Siren next? Siren, go ahead and tell us. I read a little bit in your intro about how you despise school, and that kind of pushing up against resistance was a part of your whole school experience. And if you can talk a little bit about what got you to the breaking point, a breaking point to leave school, and then what that freedom afforded you after you left school.
Well, my breaking point literally was high school. When I was younger, I went through elementary school, middle school, and then high school. And, I was younger. I did basically just what my parents told me to do. And I was a little kid, and I didn't really have much thought of for myself. And I just did what they told me to do. And I was one of those kids that you could consider like smart kids in school, where I got good grades and all of that stuff. And just good grades mainly. And but I didn't like the people that I was around with. And I mean, as far as teachers go, I only had some that I felt comfortable with and that I liked. But most of them, they were either meh or downright crappy. And when I got to high school, I had to wake up earlier. The people, just as the levels went up, the people just got meaner or clickier. And I felt that I didn't relate to anyone in school, that I almost couldn't relate to anyone in school. And I found the work to be mundane, and it didn't satisfy me at all. I didn't see what it was going to do for my future. And it got to a point so bad in high school where I started seeing this psychologist, and I eventually stopped seeing her. And then I remember Stephen was mentioning a couple of things. He mentioned something about where he talked to some people like right before dropping out, and I remember the counselor would tell me and my parents how homeschooling can be very expensive, and just throwing all this crazy pro school rhetoric, to to one up me and to make it seem like it was her job to make what she was doing look good. So that's what she was doing. And then they would these people that I talked to, they would tell me things that like, for example, like, oh, what college or do you think you're going to go to, or things like that. And I just got sick of it, and I missed so many days. I barely passed ninth grade, but once I got to 10th grade, I missed so many days that I would have had to make up all that probably in summer school and stuff like that. And I ended up repeating, and that's when I had it. So I just left school when it kicked me out of the system due to excessive absences. And I've pretty much just been at home for the most part ever since. I feel like I did benefit to the point that I don't have to go to school anymore. I don't have to deal with all that. I don't have to deal with faking sickness and arguing every morning with my parents because I'm not getting up early to go to school. And I have to go back to Stephen because in some ways it seems like when it comes to the East Asian culture, it almost in some ways sounds even worse than the American society in some aspects. And I'm kind of curious as to what I guess like the specifics as to what his the authority he had to deal with, like what they told him in regards to, oh, are you going to college, or what kind of pro-school rhetoric got thrown his way, because I got a lot of pro-school rhetoric thrown my way. And yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot to describe. And in some ways, I'm happier, but things haven't really gotten better for the most part. It's been a constant struggle in general, and I don't know how I'm going to deal with it, but I'm just pretty much, it's just I take it day by day.
Wow, there's a lot to talk about.
There's a lot, yeah.
Well, first of all, Siren, my heart goes out to you. In your introduction, I read a little bit that talked about your parents not being a support system with your decision to wanting to leave school. Are they years later supportive of that choice, or are they still upset about it and believe that that choice was a mistake?
Well, yeah, let's break it down. So in regards to my parents, Steven's, he's East Asian background. Mine are immigrants, and I'm born in America. I'm first generation American, and maybe that could have something to do with it. They're from South America, and I think my mom went to some private school. She came from a pretty well-off family, and not exactly rich, but I guess well-to-do. And then my dad came from a pretty poor background, and they when I started when I had access to the internet, and I guess I just, when I matured more, I found this forum called School Survival. And because I Googled something like "I hate school," and that showed up on Google. So I visited those forums, and I found all this information about, if you drop out of school, nothing's wrong, or if you hate school, nothing's wrong with you. And these lists of people who became really successful after dropping out of high school. And then looking upon this forum, that's when I found out options like unschooling. And I was like, wow, that's what I really want to do. I want to focus on my interests, because I was getting nothing out of school, and I felt so miserable in school. But when I presented it to them, no matter in what way I did it, whether it was in a respectful kind of way, or if it was very combative and argumentative, it just always went back to their point, with their generalizations, like, oh, you need to go to school like every other kid. And it was always every other kid. And I was so sick of being compared to a ton of other kids that they were pointing out, and I was sick of the generalizations. And overall, they weren't supportive. Right now, they don't make it vocal, but I'm pretty sure I'm correct when I say that they're still not supportive of it, because when I dropped out, I took a vacation. I went to another family in New Jersey for vacation, and then I came back, and then they expected me to get a job right away. And I guess part of it was I was enjoying the leisure of not having to care about anything else, but I was also finding myself. And that's one thing that I find really I don't know how to put it, but it makes me feel good about myself that like as the years go by, I feel like I find more of myself, and I get to know more of myself. And I feel like that's something I was never really able to do in school. So, I dropped out and I stayed home, and they expected me to get a job. And I couldn't really do that because I had no experience. And I mean, that's a whole different conversation. I don't know if we're going to have that tonight, but and also I was I was younger than 18, so almost no one was going to hire some, some high school dropout with no experience. And I think it just came down to the fact that I didn't really know people. Like, I just, when I was in school, I kept to myself a lot. And, I'm just a really quiet, soft-spoken person. And I didn't really make that many connections in school. I found like the people that I met in school, it's just a lot of the connections were very forced. They weren't organic, and I just didn't relate to a lot of people in school. So it's been hard for me to think about jobs and stuff like that, or more stuff that I'm supposed to be dealing with, more priorities when I was forced, when school was forced upon me as a priority, and I'm still getting to know more of myself and what I really want to do and what kinds of people I want to be around with.
Oh my gosh, you have so touched my heart by your authenticity of your journey, and I'm really, really grateful you're on tonight's panel, Siren. We're going to talk about a lot about the social stigma of what it means to drop out. And you spoke so brilliantly about the, let's say, the immigrant's perspective. Just so you know, I've lived in South America for the last 8 years, and I know, speaking to people about my son who doesn't go to school, who I don't know if it would be classified as a different situation because he just didn't go to school versus dropping out. But the social stigma of somebody not being in school, when you've got the programming and conditioning that for generation upon generation upon generation, with the belief system that the only way to get ahead is through quote unquote education or school, that's a lot to fight up against. And so I'm so compassionate and empathetic with you, with the struggles that you face, just within your own family, you and Stephen both. So I get it. So thank you for sharing your story. And we'll talk more about it throughout the next couple hours. So I'd love to switch gears and go to John. John, so you are no longer of school age, and this is a journey that is far behind you, yet you wrote a book about it, and you're an advocate to drop out of school. What's your story? Tell us your background.
Well, my story is I was undiagnosed with dyslexia, and in like our school system that we have right now, if you have dyslexia, you think more of like three-dimensional thinking. Most dyslexics either end up in Silicon Valley, or they end up in the like movie industry, or they end up incarcerated. There's a lot of, but in the school system, even today, they don't teach the way that dyslexics learn. And in first grade, I did horrible when kindergarten, I was a really good student. In first grade, they teach you in an abstract way, and you learn in a multi-sensory way, like Orton Gillian, but they don't teach you that way. So, through school, I ended up failing first grade, and then just doing horrible all the way through elementary and middle school and high school. I got mainly D's and F's because it was, the information that they gave you were abstract, but like I said, not in a way that you learn. So, but you always, you get labeled as less than. I remember in first grade, they say if you just apply yourself or try harder, even though you are trying harder than everyone else. And then, in first grade, you end up, failing. And then who do you get your sense of self from? Is your teachers, your parents. And then, you're 6 years old and they label you as stupid or less than. And then you carry it on, second and third grade, and then teachers say things like, don't waste your time with that kid. He's not going to go anywhere or do anything. And that like crushes you, at a young age. And if instead of doing that, you can actually teach to the way the kid learns, as opposed to, try to put everyone in the same box, dyslexics are just as successful. But I found that, after all those years, I found that I couldn't be successful in that system. You try to figure out strategies, and then at the end, you just, when I was 16, I came to the conclusion, like, within this system, I can't be, successful. They label you a failure, and, you want to have something to be good at. So I dropped out of high school, and I was looking, there had to be something else out there. So, but what I ended up doing is, like, right before I dropped out of high school, I signed up for an ROT class, which is a vocational class. And it was a chef's class, and I ended up doing really, really good, or really well. And then I ended up getting a part-time job at a hotel by Disneyland. And one thing I didn't know about dyslexics is you think in 3 dimensions. And my first day there, the chef was making an ice carving, and I was wandering in the back of the hotel, and it was like the most beautiful thing I ever saw. So he ended up taking me under his wing, and he taught me how to sculpt ice. So, not far from after I dropped out of high school, I ended up just at 16 sculpting ice. And, before I knew it, within 4 months, I was doing parties all over like Southern California. And then a few years later, I guess they scattered me, and they recruited me for a cruise ship. And I spent 3 years cruising Hawaii, and then I got recruited by an Italian company in the Mediterranean, and I spent another 3 years. But I'm saying, within the school system, all they did was label me as stupid or less than, which they do to most dyslexics. Make up 15% of the school population, K through 12 in the U.S., which is 8 million kids. And almost all of them, when they get to first grade, they don't learn the abstract way. They fall 2 to 3 grade levels behind, all the way, at 4th grade, when they try to, the transition from, instead of learning to read to reading to learn in 4th grade, when they start paying attention, the kids are already behind. And then the dropout rate for dyslexics like me is 42%. So, because they don't, like I said, they only look at things from one lens. They don't look at the talents, even though, like, now that I'm older, almost everyone in Silicon Valley, 65% of the programmers and everyone who makes, that makes the games, Pixar Studios, Apple, because I'm up there every 3 weeks, they're all dyslexic or ADHD. But, they had to learn that not at the school. You had to, if you wanted to learn Python and Java, you do it by yourself because you're not getting it from the school. And then you get like, I have lots of friends like in the movie industry, there's, most of the directors. So what's upsetting to me is, like, as a, like a dyslexic, all the school system gave you was like, you're not that good, you're not that smart. But when you get out, then you find out, like, you have all these incredible talents. They only focus on what you're bad at, like, you can't write that well, or you can't spell that well. So, yeah. Any other questions? Or
John, going to your point about being compared to being stupid or less than, I mainly got that from my parents. When it came from the school officials, it was me being compared to being bright. And I hate that term, bright, because it's not you. They're not using it to describe you as being intelligent. They're describing you as you're not being obedient enough. You're not doing what they want you to do, and they're calling you bright. But it just sounds more like it comes off negatively connotation wise, and I really when you hear those things like being called stupid and or a loser, I've heard that one a lot. It really just kills your self-esteem, and I'm still going through that. It kills me a lot especially when I hear it. I just kind of shut down, and I just don't want to do anything because I've lost all motivation. I mean, school has killed my motivation enough. I don't need to be being compared to things or being called things. And it just, it really, really just shuts you down.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Like, one of the worst thing that I think that school does, not your individuality, they don't reward that, or your creativity, which is like, I think the coolest thing about any individual, they kill it. They reward you if you're like a sheep, if you're like, you go along with everyone, you know, you're quiet, you sit still, don't ask too many questions. Those kids are, you know, rewarded, which I don't think that's not critical thinking. That's just, you know, being passive. So.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this has to do with the obedience, as both John and Siren pointed out. And within the obedience it's in support of this social programming that we're all sort of challenging, you know, by having this conversation. So yeah, there's so much to talk about. But before we get so carried away, I want to go ahead and give the floor to Monica, who we haven't heard from yet. Monica, share with us a little bit about your background. Now, you too dropped out of school at 17 with one year to go, and I remember reading people thought you were crazy. Through your article, though, I discovered Grace Llewellyn's Drop Out of School and Get a Life. I think it was linked through your article. I remember after reading your article in 2008, which is when we started our own unschooling journey, I read that book. And from that point on, as a parent, you know, oh yeah, high school, I'm not even going to go there for my kid, and I wish I didn't go there for me, and I get it, and I understand the perspective that you guys are coming from. But tell me, what kind of social norms did you have to fight up against, and how is it you went into education after all that?
So there's a lot to say. I just want to start off by giving my background. So I am also first generation. Both of my parents are from Taiwan, and that's my heritage. And they both went to relatively prestigious universities and studied engineering. And I think that both of my parents were actually really concerned about me as I progressed throughout school, even though I was doing very well. I think my story gets told a lot of different ways. Like, I remember when Blake Bowles mentioned me in his College Without High School book, one of the sentences was like, Monica Chen had it all. And I don't think that's actually accurate. It makes it sound like I had everything. But I was successful, like, from the outside perspective of like being in journalism, being on varsity sports, and always having like a 4-point-something GPA. But my father, you know, was part of corporate America for a while, and he really despised clocking in and out, jumping through hoops, and they actually encouraged me to not do that. That being said, I think that after I left high school, I had an internal drive to always be pushing myself to succeed. And I think that some of that is societal as well, but I think that part of it comes from myself. And so I was always trying to accomplish things that might not have necessarily been for me, but also for other people around me who would view me a certain way. And I got into education because this is something that I cared so deeply about on a personal level. And I read, you know, Grace Llewellyn's books, I read John Taylor Gatto's books, and those are just like the entrance into different forms of pedagogy and social justice work that I've been really involved in ever since. And I think that it's been frustrating as an educator. I was a third grade teacher for a while, and then in environmental science education, and now a sexual health educator. And I've seen over and over again that there is a very frustrating power dynamic in schools. There's a lot of rigidity that was really challenging for me as a teacher. I was told to teach a certain way that I think was really hard for my heart, because I knew that it shouldn't be that way, and I wanted to teach the way I wanted, because it's not like I was able to teach in a Waldorf school or anything like that. I was very much teaching in what they're calling turnaround schools these days, which used to be called failing schools. So that's been really challenging for me. I think that throughout my life, I've been taking on a lot of big challenges and then finding myself, with a lot of like structural barriers, a lot of systemic inequalities that have really bothered me and like made it difficult to like continue like certain lines of work. So I've been constantly getting very frustrated. I still am an educator, but like how I educate has changed because I think that starting from when I was a teenager, I was able to recognize those structural inequalities.
Yeah, I'm really happy you're part of tonight's panel too. So going back into the system and doing social justice work, how do you see a light, a path, the ability to make changes in a system that many agree is just simply broken?
Yeah, and I think that the first thing that I want to acknowledge is that I had a lot of privilege in being able to leave high school that I don't see a lot of other high school students having, especially in areas where I've taught. I had access to a car even that helped me go to like different jobs and internships. I had a really top rate junior college near me. I had the full support of my parents, and I also had, backup so that I had a lot to stand on so that I was able to go to college at UC Berkeley, the following year even. In terms of increasing accessibility to unschooling, that's a really challenging question because I think that 17-year-old Monica 10 years ago was a lot more naive and would have believed that, that it's very possible to just sort of ignore like racial inequality and class inequality. I do believe that teachers have an incredible role in the classroom, and if there are really strong educators who recognize that, then they have the potential to empower their students and guide them even outside of the classroom. It's hard to I mean, when Betsy DeVos became Secretary of Education, I was just in total shock because to me, that represented like a complete lack of accountability to all American people because I don't know a single teacher or educator who was actually in support of Betsy DeVos's nomination. And so to ignore every single educator, I think says a lot. So I am not sure about the state of public education in America. I think that there's been for a while now this sort of like a battle between the education reformers, quote unquote, who are pushing things like charter schools and school choice and so forth, and the other teachers who have been in this profession for a really long time. And there's just a whole lot politically going on. So unfortunately, some of that does not help our students. In fact, things like Common Core, I have a whole lot to say about standardized testing and Common Core and so forth. It's challenging. I think that there are battles in certain states that are being won and at the school district level, but especially at the classroom level. It's the local level that I see the most hope.
Monica, so I want to go to your point about how your parents, I guess, supported you for the most part or for all parts. My dad, he's in the military, or he kind of is still, and my mom was a homemaker, and I didn't really get their support. They wanted me to, I guess they thought that I was going to go through school and still be that honors student all throughout school, and then go to a good college, and then get some good, probably corporate America job or something like that, or become a lawyer or doctor, etc. And they didn't. I didn't really have their support. They thought I was going to do that, and then I guess a lot of this with me turning around and not what happened with me and ended ending up going so far as to drop out of school, I guess maybe came as a little bit of a surprise for them, but I wish I had that support. I still don't, to be honest, and it really sucks because there's things that I could be doing that I wish I could be doing, and I a part of it is I'm very I'm very stubborn now. I think going through school has made me so stubborn because now I want to do things my way, and you could call me selfish or I guess naive, etc. But I had to deal listening to authority for like what 11 years of my life, and as I learn more about myself, I'm learning all these things that I know school can never offer me, or college, um, and it after I dropped out, it got to the point where sometimes my dad would actually bribe me with things if I like took up a certain job, or I took up a certain path that I didn't want to do, but he tried bribing me, and now they have this thought, like this societal thought, which I think is a problem, like, oh, you leave school whether you graduate or you drop out, and oh, you just go to college or you just get some retail service job, and all will be swell. And I just don't think that, call me naive, but I just don't think it shouldn't be that way.
Stephen, you wanted to add something to that?
Yeah, yes, I think something about like the privilege and inequality, to add something onto Monica. I think one thing that kind of, irks me a little, is kind of like when people like talk about like, oh, homeschooling, being too expensive, and like, oh, homeschooling in like suburban valley schools only for rich white people. But I feel that it's like, that's so hypocritical. How can you say that, when you yourself like, have like these so many, privileges, and you don't even, know about the homeschoolers or the unschoolers, or you never looked into it. So how can you say something like that? And I think for me, like, I was always a good student. Like, I never like was in a position like John where like I was always treated as incompetent. I was like I was a very good student, but I think just somewhere along the way I was like, I don't think I want to go to, school, or I don't think I want to necessarily take this path that everyone, around me, my friends, are taking. And you know what, I maybe school, I don't want to go to school, and like, or try a different alternative for myself, I could, still be in school, and I could, still have like a 4.0 GPA, or like just have like brim with extracurricular activities, or like ramping up my resume for college. But I just, decided not to do that.
Stephen, how hard was it to just stick by your guns and to follow through with something where everybody seemingly is against you?
Because I have people like on the internet, and I have one particular person that I really, am close with. Like it's online, but her she's in like a unschooler, and she came from like a Jewish Orthodox background, and like I really enjoy talking with her because like, it gives me an opportunity, and it expands my mind. It gives me a fresh perspective, about like, about things and like issues, and she's, very supportive of me, and she's very respectful, and, I would love, for more adults to, listen to teens and, understand what they have to say, and I think it's, I think like a thing, like a similar connotation is like, us, like when you're like not 18 or like under that age, you kind of, being restricted by society, and you being kept out of the adult world, even though you're, I think like through like historical like evidence, or I can try to point out, is that like people have been like given like, okay, you're an adult now, at a much younger age, at like 14 or 15 or something like that, once you like reach puberty, you're an adult. But it doesn't seem to be that way today, or in the Western world.
If I can chime in here. Thank you guys for sharing. But I thought my life was miserable when I was in school, but the best thing that for me that ever happened is when I dropped out of school, I was just the most, like, I was like, you get to that tipping point where you just don't care. You're kind of standing on the abyss, you know? And then after you jump, and then for me, it turned out well. You know, I found very quickly my life was just, I was like happy every day. I would wake up happy. Whereas when I was going to school, I'd wake up miserable and I hated school. You know, from 16 when I dropped out until now, it's like I've had the most amazing and the best life ever. I would never trade it for anything. And I could never have thought, like when I was in, you know, second and third grade or even first grade, that my life would be as, fun and exciting as it is. So like I do not regret dropping out. It gave me an opportunity to find all these other things that I was good at, that if I would have just stayed in school and pursued, I would have never kind of found those things in my life. I don't think I'd be as happy. I'm married and have a 4-year-old daughter, and we just seem to have like a really, every day is like, to me, it seems like a magical, wonderful day. Or just a fun day. I don't want to make it too much, but I still think it's the best thing I ever did. So
I absolutely love that. So, I end up asking panels this question a lot, but it's so relevant to this particular panel. I'd love for each panelist to sort of chime in and tell me, in your opinion, in your perspective, what is the purpose of education? And I'll just let you guys chime in. Anyone?
I guess I could start off with that. That's a difficult question to answer because so many people think education means, they have their own definition of it. Like some people think that it needs to be done a certain way for you to be successful. And then there's other people who they want to try alternatives and they think alternatives are their pathway for education. And you have all these conflicting ideas and arguments. Arguments are conflicting, but you have conflicting ideas and you have arguments, and it's a really convoluted question in my opinion. But I guess in my opinion, I think education is just really staying true to yourself. That's how I'd put it.
I can go next. This is something that we debate a lot in schools of education. We talk about, the purpose of education being to prepare people to be engaged members of a democratic society, to be prepared for the workforce. Some people might say that it's so that you can be like a full human being and just like the greatest embodiment of knowledge that you can be. I think it's challenging because education has so many different modalities and is communicated in so many different ways, and it's really unfortunate that a lot of people like have that banking system of education that doesn't work for everybody. It's not a one size fits all. So I kind of don't want to like say that the purpose of education is any one thing, because I know that it can be so different for all people. So I guess that I would hope that education can just support a person's ambitions in life.
Okay, I mind if I pop in? All right. For me, I think it's pretty easy to. It's not a very difficult question, but for me, I think I like John Holt's definition of education. Something you get for yourself, not and when people talk about education, they talk about like something to get from like, authorities, But I see it as just something like something that's like a leisure or self-directed activity, that you want to do, that you have passion about, that you care about, and just observation and just learning from the world around you, and just picking up on environmental cues and social cues as well.
And, for me, because I would say, because I'm dyslexic, we have a huge thing, like, because we have like a pretty big community here in California and up and down the state, is just creativity. Like, there's like following your creative mind wherever it takes you and not putting limits on that. I know it doesn't embody everything, but I mean, that seems to be the makes life, at least for me, exciting and fun every day, and a lot of the people I run into. So I would say education is like, taking your creative mind, building or making or, programming or, making a movie, all kinds of different things. I would say whatever your outlet is just pursuing that. So, and live a good and a happy life, I would add to that too.
Yeah, I absolutely love all of your very, very authentic responses to that. And they're all very, very personal. But what I didn't hear is education is somebody standing in front of a lectern giving you information and testing you that you memorized or that you process that information. I didn't hear anybody say that. And to me, not all, but to me, my impression of high school and most conventional forms of quote-unquote education are that, and they expect the effects that Monica talked about, which is becoming a great, democratic citizen and to be prepared for the future and all of the other things that are the standard answers to this question. I always see a disconnect between the two. So if indeed education is really a personal thing, and none of you actually said the word learning, but if we're wired to learn already, then what do we need this thing called school for? So it's interesting that this panel is really, really tapped into that. Monica, I'd love to give you the floor because I know working in education, this is your field. This is the thing that sparks you.
Yes, as a teacher, I was required to have like a point system, a red, yellow, green light, a behavioral system. I have calculated percentages, arbitrary grades. And I felt like, I have been sort of like forced in like rigid school environments to teach in a way that is like very untrue to like how I want to teach and educate. I think that unfortunately we talked about obedience and compliance being resulting factors of our current system, and I see that, and it's heartbreaking to me, especially because I think that we live in a world where there is so much inequality, and I think that a quote-unquote democratic system, whether or not we have one, is up for debate. But if we do have one, then I think that critical analysis, self-reflection, like those kinds of skills that we would ideally want for a democratic society aren't necessarily enforced in this system. And I think that sometimes people are afraid to participate actively in our society. I think that a truly democratic society, people would be voicing their concerns more, not just necessarily out on the streets, but writing op-eds, communicating, educating each other. And a lot of jobs that people are sort of like pushed into, like mainstream jobs, sort of do fit with the current form of education, where like there is like a set of tasks that you are forced to complete at certain hours of the day between X time and Y time. And it's really heartbreaking because it's hard to galvanize momentum for various issues and causes that are staring us right in the face here in America.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a much bigger topic than all of that. So Monica, thank you for that. And to me, it's really interesting for you to come from a self-directed background and go into the actual pedagogy of learning and teaching in, schools schools. So that to me is really interesting. Let's move forward a little bit. If we could focus on ways, because we are putting this information out into the world, right? We are recording these conversations, and it's important to have a positive dialogue about this topic where not very many are present. What kind of suggestions does this panel have about changing the social stigma of being a Sorry, did I freeze for a second? John, why don't we go to you? You've written a book about this. Maybe you can talk a little bit about this, changing the social stigma.
Oh, in regards to like being a high school dropout, or well, I mean, a lot of times if people, I think one of our panelists said they had looked or read something about, when you Googled what I hate school, I believe it was at Siren. Yeah, then you all of a sudden you find all the people that, created these incredible companies. They either dropped out of high school, almost all of them, or they dropped out of college, almost all of them with very few exceptions. So, I mean, I think information will show you that, that if you have a creative kid and they want to do something, and you feel like you're just doing busy work in school a lot of times, depending on the class, and you want to pursue one, a specific interest, a lot of times, you got to be bold enough as a person and then go pursue it. You can work with somebody or study with somebody. Like I said, a lot of the people like in Silicon Valley, I mean, they learned to code, by themselves, or they worked with someone for about a year and a half, and then boom, that was enough skill for them to be successful for their entire life. So I was like, how are we even getting this information? You don't get this information on, you don't have to be good at like 6 subjects. You can be good at one or two, or even just one, and live like the most incredible life. So, but you don't really get that a lot of times at school. They're not really specific about those things. So more information, yes. So,
I think that I'd really try and lead my life like as an example. And what I'm going to compare this to is my veganism. And so there's this wonderful woman who Colleen Patrick Goudreau, who talks about like the different stages of veganism. And if you've ever met a vegan, you might know that like many of us feel like the issue is like very, much in our hearts, and we get very passionate about it. And then there's like the evangelical stage where you just want to like tell everybody to go vegan because like you're really worried about the animals and the environment and health and so forth. And that can be really off-putting to a lot of people, to just say, oh, don't eat that, you shouldn't eat that, or don't do that. Like if you're in school, you're a sheep or anything like that. As I've progressed in my veganism and in my activism, I've realized that like what I can do is just be vegan, eat well, make good food for other people so that they can realize, oh, a vegan cookie is actually super delicious. I can't believe it doesn't have eggs and dairy in it. And it's the same for me for being queer. It's the same for me with like education. I have had the privilege of being able to do place-based learning. I've been able to like bring different concepts of various pedagogies like into my practice. And so like these are like little nuggets, so to speak, that relate to unschooling. And I can share these with my students and coworkers, my colleagues, and I think it inspires them to recognize that there doesn't have to be just one way. And if they can see like those positive results, then people might be more open to it. And again, my story where I've been quote unquote successful even after dropping out of high school and redeveloping my love for learning has been emphasized a lot in like my story, because I really was very frustrated as a high schooler. I was, successful, but I was also experiencing what you were experiencing, Lainey, where I was in John and Stephen and Siren. I hated waking up every single morning. And I was really sleep deprived because I didn't go to bed until like 3 in the morning because I was working on my AP US history outlines after like trying to juggle everything to, make myself seem better so that I would get accepted into college. I was really miserable. I wasn't happy, and, you know, being an unschooler really enabled me to free myself from that burden. I can honestly say that I loved learning again. I really, truly did. And I think that as an educator, that's something that you do want to cultivate in your students. That is something that like you hold very dear. Like that joy is super important, even in a school that is like highly regimented. And so if I can talk about that joy, which I like still carry now, you know, I love the title of Life Learning Magazine because it really says, you know, unschooling doesn't stop when you turn 18 years old or like through the age of 22. I identify as a life learner now. Like I am still an unschooler. And I think that that can be really inspiring to people.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point. You talk about the parallels to unschooling, and not everybody was like John. I don't think you identified with with being an unschooler, but being a life learner myself and a mother to an unschooled teen, like that is very alive and real. And maybe that taking the benefits of unschooling and the unschooling path and applying it to the stigma of dropout, we can then shift maybe some of those ideas a little bit. Anybody else have any thoughts about how to change the stigma of being a dropout? Anybody else want to touch on that first?
I don't know if I really have any suggestions, but I was listening to what John and Monica were saying, and I feel like I feel like that we need to make it from like these successful people, like what John was saying about these people in Silicon Valley. And I mean, you have like on School Survival, there's this list of celebrities and what general society would call successful people, like Quentin Tarantino and Paris Hilton and the Osbournes, et cetera, being high school dropouts. And look where they are now with millions of dollars in net worth. And we need to change it to where there are exceptions to the rule, to where finally like high school dropouts, unschoolers, homeschoolers, etc., we can be applications to the rule, I guess is what I'm saying. And I'm surprised, like when you mention these successful people, all you get are like, oh, well, they're just exceptions to the rule. What makes you think you're going to be even just as good as they are? And I like how this discussion we're making it known that we want to make people like us applications to the rule and not exceptions, because it certainly is possible. Because if all these people, politicians like Ronald Reagan and and scientists and inventors like Albert Einstein, if all these people did it, why can't other people do it? Why can there only be exceptions, and why can't there be applications to the rule?
Okay, all right. For me, this is okay. I'm the last one. Okay. So what is what was the question? How can I reduce this? How can we reduce the stigma of dropping out? I think part of it has to do with just like like the societal acceptance, like, and just like people being comfortable, like, or like not freaking out like over people who don't go to school, or don't necessarily like follow the traditional like public school convention, and like people learning outside of school. And I also think that it could also be like like spreading of like unschooling and people accepting and being comfortable with that. But I think right now it's I think for a lot of people it's a little like too like uncomfortable, maybe a little too radical with like unschooling, and like things like that, because it kind of does like somewhat undermine like, the current, school system, as of now, which is, about like, adult-led, adult-led learning, adults, being the ones in charge and like dictating, I guess. I don't know how to necessarily describe this, but like where like the child's like rights are not respected, or where they're demeaned at, or like they're disrespected all the time at school,
Go add something real quick. Yeah. And thank you. One thing I've noticed, like watching over the, what was it, the last 5 to 7 years, or even a little bit more, is it used to be where you had unschoolers or homeschoolers used to be about like 3 to 4% of the schooling population. But, some of the places where I live, we're up in San Gabriel Mountains. I mean, in the areas in California, it's risen in some areas from 3% to, homeschoolers are up to 14%, in some areas 17%. So there's a lot of people unhappy with and they're, they get their fundings and they take it to the homeschooling. So I mean, there's something going on there. So that's to have so many people shift to doing it at home. So just wanted to add that part.
I'd like to add something real quick and just say that, again, I think we need to make, I think something big needs to happen, and there's been small things that happen that have happened already. I can recall like a few moments where I guess the whole like application to the rule phrase happening. Like I remember this YouTuber that he made this video called "Don't Stay in School," and it pretty much went viral, and a lot of people started commenting on it. Or Jaden Smith, the son of Will Smith. I don't know if Will Smith is a dropout or anything like that, but Jaden Smith made a tweet on Twitter saying if everybody in the world dropped out of school, we would have a much more intelligent society. And for me personally, one thing that keeps me going is I want to become like one of these what society would call successful people, so I can really just do something that has that big of an impact, whether positive or whether how people would take it would be positively or negatively. That would be on them. But there's a lot of people like in Silicon Valley and those people that I mentioned earlier that are successful, but I don't think it's really just not talked about much. And I wish like some of these people who did these things like drop out, I wish they would talk more about it. And I think maybe that would have a bigger impact.
I'd also like to add on to what John was saying about how there's a lot of unschoolers out there, that there is a community out there that really helps to destigmatize unschooling for me. When I left school, I went to Not Back to School camp in Oregon, which is run by Grace Llewellyn and a whole bunch of other really wonderful unschoolers and self-directed learners. And that was really helpful for me. So I would encourage anybody who's thinking about unschooling or anything really to just find the community that's out there. Additionally, I realized that going to community college was super different than being in high school, and also regular college as well, because I was able to create my own major. I was able to take classes that I kind of wanted to learn, right? Like the whole self-directed piece was more in there. Whereas in high school, I felt like I had to follow, the A through G requirements to get into UC and so forth. So recognizing that there are people who are doing similar things at the junior college level, at Not Back to School camp, that was really helpful for me in destigmatizing unschooling.
Yeah, well, I do think that there's a disconnect between unschoolers and the unschooling world and what the general public thinks about with the term high school dropout. So there's still not that direct connection, I don't think. I mean, I think it's touching on the the fringes. Some people get it, But I totally agree from an internal perspective, the support needs to be there. And I do agree that community college, finally, if a learner is and decide what they want to learn versus being told what to learn, it shifts what our relationship is to actual learning and education. So that's a really, really good point. I want to ask John. John, if you could talk a little bit about what it means, what it meant for you going to school, going to Harvard, right? You went to Harvard.
Yes. Yeah.
How did you do that as a high school dropout?
Well, I didn't know. I was like undiagnosed dyslexic, you know. And Will Smith for Siren, he's dyslexic too. So sorry, you just brought him up. But like how I did that was, you know, when you're dyslexic and they teach you in a way you don't learn and you're labeled stupid, you know, a lot of times you think that until you get screened and learn that you learn differently. So once I got, you know, it wasn't until like later in life that I got screened and I found out that I had dyslexia. Someone pointed it out when I was at a community college. And then you figure out the way you learn, and then you go from having like, you know, F's and D's, and the highest grade you get is a C minus, and you're excited, to having like a transcript filled with, you know, B's and A's, and eventually all A's. And basically, I would say, if you know what your learning style is, and each individual person has one, and you utilize it with techniques and strategies, you can do fantastic. But I think they're like, and that's another big thing they're doing in Silicon Valley, is that everyone's, and I apologize if I repeat that a lot, but is that they care a lot about that. Your learning style means something. And like, before you go into first grade, and like what we're trying to work with thinklexic.org, is to know what the kid's learning style is, so every kid can be successful. And, you know, and that's why I think it's an important thing. So, and just like a fun fact was, I started in community college before I went to, got admitted to Harvard, and I hadn't been back to school since I dropped out at 16. And you know how you take the math and English test? I scored so low when I took those tests that my first classes that I took didn't even have grades. They were just like, you know, pass, no pass. But eventually, you know, I found my way and my strategies and ended up having all right. And another thing I would say is, as a dyslexic, college is a wonderful place. I thought Harvard is like Disneyland for, like, if you're dyslexic, because you can pursue whatever your creative mind wants to do, and they'll fund you for everything with very few exceptions. You're just like, I want to do this. Here's the check. And then you can go do that. So, and that, you know, and at Berkeley too, they fund, but not as much, but it's a different environment, I think. I think high school is too structured. You feel like you're being squeezed on, in my opinion, like in a vice grip or something. So, yeah. I hope I didn't go off too far on that question.
No, that was great. That was great. Thank you for sharing that. To me, what I find really, really interesting is that, you know, you're somebody who is self-proclaimed with a disability. If dyslexia is considered a disability, and you've used that to support your learning in a very self-directed way. In your opinion, John, do you think that all people that have dyslexia should drop out of school and become self-directed?
Yes. Well, okay, by nature, dyslexic people, and like I'm part of like a community of, there's like 35,000 of us, so, and they're overwhelmingly like creative. Like I would say over 40% start their own business, and they're in a huge majority are, like I said, in like we called Silicon Valley is called a dyslexic motherland for us. And then, so I would say a lot of the things that dyslexics are really good at, like computer coding, making movies, engineering, well, that's in school, but a lot of it is not in the school. That means you have to go, unless you're at one of those few schools there's a couple of magnet schools that have really cool things that you can do. If you're not lucky enough to be in those really cool schools, you have to go outside school. So like if you're dyslexic in your high school and you want to learn about all these other things, you either have to, learn from someone else or take another class that's not within the schools. So that if you say drop out, I would say drop out of a system that doesn't work for you and drop into a life system that does work for you. I know it's kind of harsh, but you're an individual. It's your life. You need to find what's best for you, each individual, and what you love to do. Like if you give whatever person the thing that they love to do, they're going to be happy. You know what I mean? You can work hard at that. So you can drop out of something that doesn't work, but drop into something that does work for you. And each individual each individual has their own talents. You gotta explore different things to find those talents. But once you find those talents, it's like a rocket or something. You just take off and have a great time. So.
Yeah, and I want to thank you, John, for really emphasizing happiness, because I think that in the unschooling community, it's really nice when people say like, oh, well, there are successful people, right? There are people who dropped out of high school and they went to Harvard, like, oh my God, that's so amazing. Or, they've gone to some Ivy League school or some prestigious four-year college. And I think that's really good. And it's also just like one small part of a story. And my concern in telling my story has always been that like I'm reinforcing a narrative where like success is seen as going into a four-year college and then getting like a certain high-paying job or something like that. And that's why I like really try to emphasize the happiness portion and the joy for learning. And because that's what I would really want, students, children, adults to have. And it's really difficult because our society does, measure success a certain way, especially where I live, which is Silicon Valley.
I want to add one part. My view, like well-known colleges, I don't know if it's, I think they pick people that are already have certain talents that they would have pursue anyways. So I don't know if that's the spark that's making that individual do well. A lot of times it's just the individual, and then, learning from somebody. It does not have to be at a university. If you learn, like an apprenticeship with someone, whatever the industry may be, it can, get you to where you want to be. So.
And I'm glad that this conversation has gone down the path a little bit towards university and college. And Monica, you bring up a really good point. You're right. The success stories are the ones that are shown almost like a badge of honor in our world, our unschoolers world, or any of the alternative education world. And you're right. The ordinary student is also, their story is so important. Shall I say the ordinary learner, the ones that are successful in designing a very happy life for themselves without college, without school, those are the stories that need to be told and heard and listened to as well. And yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It is important. I want to bring up one more question, and then we'll do closing thoughts after this. The question is, in the unschooling world, we have something called deschooling, and it's something that people, learners go through as they sort of decompress from the paradigm of school, being told what to do. Those unschoolers that never went to school in the first place generally don't go through the deschooling process, but those that are taken out or leave school for whatever reason at whatever age tend to go through a process where they realize that they have freedom for the first time and realize that the motivation for what they want to learn is their own and they're not being told what to do. And a lot of times that kind of freedom comes with this process, which, like I said, we call deschooling, which a lot of times looks like doing a whole lot of nothing. And I think Siren talked in the intro about spending the first couple months, after getting back from staying with his family or friends of his family on the East Coast and then going back. He didn't want to do anything. And that can be viewed by somebody from the outside who doesn't understand the deschooling process as non-motivation or quote unquote being lazy. Can we talk a little bit about when somebody drops out of school, what kind of emotional process they go through in order to get to a place where they actually want to start designing and not just designing but guiding their own path? I'm just going to open that up to the panel, and whoever wants to respond first, just jump in.
Sorry if there's background noise now, but I'll try to make it quick. To add something to that, I think something about the whole lot of nothing thing. I think even my sister understands it, but I feel that it's kind of a wrong attitude to have. If that somehow if you're not preparing to what you're doing is preparing a step by a rigid curriculum to get a career, or you're working or you're going to school, and if you're not doing those things, then you're just what you're doing is just somehow useless, which I disagree with. And I think that a lot of things that you do, even if you're free time, it may be seen as lazy. It's developing a skill that you have, and a passion that you generally are interested in. And I think that's important to stress out.
I can continue on to what Stephen and Lainey were saying. When it comes to that whole process of deschooling and I get life after school, first thing I want to mention is it's really difficult when for the first 18 years of your life you're in school and you're having people telling you what to do, how to think, how to do whatever they want you to do. And then after 18, it's you're thrown out to society, to the wolves. And it's all right, you're going to make a life for yourself, and you're going to have to figure it out all on your own. When, before, when you were when you were in school, you were listening to your parents, and you were getting good grades because they were telling you how to. And now there's it's almost there's no guidance for you anymore after that. And, you're kind of running around like a headless chicken. Oh no, what do I do? And another thing is I think some people just don't really get the opportunity, I guess, to de-school because I remember on the school survival forums, there's this thread that popped up, and it was really popular. And it actually got moved to the Best of School Survival forum, pretty much a forum where the best of the best threads that have happened on the site get moved to. And this user created a thread called Youth That Betray the Youth Rights and the Anti-School Movement When They Get Older. And I feel like people who didn't really like school, and now that they're older and I guess they don't have to deal with it, it's they're free from the oppression that school, the oppression from school, and then they begin to parrot the same BS that we combat day in and day out. So, two things is there's youth who become adults and they end up abandoning this movement that we're discussing here, and just there's those youth that betray the school movement, and if you don't get the chance to de-school, it's just kind of you go through school and then you're thrown out to the wolves.
I'd like to add something. I'm really torn about deschooling because I think that I was personally really motivated to like be really productive and like take full advantage of my all these opportunities that I had. And I think that that was like also true when, you know, I've left jobs and I was like unemployed and I was trying to like figure out what to do and I didn't want to be doing nothing. And then I came across some of those anti-capitalist love notes that say things along the lines of like, you're worth so much more than your productivity, which takes a while to sink in for someone like me, raised as I was. But I do believe that. On the other hand, like I also know that like as a millennial that I and a lot of the people in my social circle are just are on our devices a lot. And that in a way I see that sort of becoming like another thing that can be kind of abused. And so there's like this balance I think that has to happen where you recognize that like being in a part of a system like Siren said where like you are being told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and that moving away from that takes time. And on the other extreme, like I do know many people, not necessarily unschoolers, but just people in general who like once they're out of a system, once they are out of a 9-to-5 job or out of high school, where there is just a tendency to sort of be a little bit stagnant. And I recognize that it takes time. So again, like I'm really conflicted about like deschooling, and I know that everybody's process is different, but I also like really honor that everybody's process is different because we're all different people.
Does anybody else want to chime in about deschooling? Thumbs up? Okay, so part of the reason why I ask about deschooling is not only the learner goes through the process, but if, you know, talking about the adults that are no longer part of the you know, being in the school system, right? They've grown up, they're either adults or life learners or whatever, but they're not part of the system anymore. There still is a sense of, again, I brought this up in the introduction, the social programming that really defines an unquestioned stigma about dropping out of school. And that is part of the deschooling process that needs to happen culturally in order to support these choices. So I think it's the dialogue, and I think what Monica said about living an example of you know, a well-rounded, educated, happy person who dropped out of school is the perfect example. But I also think community and forums like this and articles and books and all of the other things that contribute to changing that social stigma, because I think it takes a lot of bravery to do what each one of you have done on this panel. It takes a lot of bravery when you're going up against a system that doesn't support you and has a belief that's contrary to what your own personal belief is. It takes a lot of inner strength, and I think you all have it. I'm really honored that you're all a part of tonight's conversation. I'd like to go around and wrap this up and go to each of our panelists and ask you to share some closing thoughts. And with the closing thoughts, they can either be, you know, a general statement about being a high school dropout, or it could be a piece of advice for somebody who is considering it, or maybe it's to the parent who is from an internal perspective not supporting their child who wants to make this decision. So share a closing thought along those lines. It's your choice. And then after you're done with your closing thought, please do share your projects and websites and anything else that you want to promote. So I'm going to just, again, I'm so anti-school that I'm not going to pick on somebody. So I'm going to just open it up to the panel and let you go ahead and self-organize. And if nobody pops in, then I will call on somebody. So we'll just leave it at that.
Okay, I'll go ahead and start. I would say that, for unschooling, it's your, even though you're, you may be 16 or high school age, whenever you decide to unschool or even younger, it's your life, and life can be a wonderful and amazing thing, don't live someone else's life. Because I know people, like, I'm older, you guys are younger than me, that a parent or someone told them, do this, do that, and then follow this career. And now they're much older and they did all the things they were supposed to do and they're miserable. Remember, individuals, it's your life. Don't live someone else's life. Find out your talents and, pursue the things that you like, that, and if you do it from a very young age, I believe that you will have a, happy life. So, and look around you too. You can see some of the people that did everything they were supposed to do, and you see enough of those people and they are not that happy. And that's something for you to think about. And if you would like this wonderful book here, High School Dropout to Harvard, or if you'd like to see I was featured in the Being You documentary with Howie Mandel, you can click on is it on the note page? It's just fun. So, and that's, I would say, the most important message that I would leave with everybody. So.
For my closing thoughts, I think this is like also parents. I've said this like before, but I feel that like I can't stress enough like how important it is, that like you should like, respect, or like any adults like, who may think of like as kids as like, they're, they just, lay around and do nothing, or they're incompetent people. I feel that, you should give us an opportunity, to, give us some expectations like, like hard, challenges. And, I think we can do a good job of rising up to the challenge, and there's, histories or people of, doing things that, at a very young age. And I feel that you should, listen and respect to your kids and, try to listen to what they have to say and like give them, freedom and autonomy and respect them, and love them as well. And for my closing thoughts as well, I feel that, dropping out or like the statistics on like dropping out, I kind of feel it's like kind of like a correlation, but not like necessarily a causation, kind of thing, if that makes sense. I don't know, but like, I feel that like it's the reason why like it looks so bad for high school dropout. It's probably because of like, their poor background or like just them living in like systemic disadvantage, like, or like if you're a Native American, like, or like you're surrounded by alcohol, lots and lots of alcohol in some communities, Native American communities, or like if you're like, living in like inner city Chicago or like, Newark or Camden or something like that, you're at an extreme disadvantage, so don't necessarily think that like high school dropouts necessarily equal like, you living on the streets. It's usually people, like having like poverty issues in the first place that led them to drop out.
I guess I can chime in now and follow up on John and Stephen, and just say that be yourself and you're not alone. There's the School Survival Forums, a community of people who hate school, so you are not alone. And I'm a moderator on those forums, but we don't really moderate or do anything like that. It's just, a bunch of people who don't like school, and if you need help with, I guess, deschooling or with alternatives to school, we can provide you all those resources, and we can help you out, whether no matter where in your life you are, and hopefully you just join our community and be a part of this big discussion.
Thank you. Just a few last thoughts. The first one that occurred to me is that when I'm answering calls on the switchboard and people have questions about sexual health, like the first thing that we're trained to do is to just give permission, around the topic. And since I've been in the unschooling community for the last decade, like people have reached out to me, parents have reached out to me, students have reached out to me, and I think that as much as they want to learn all the nuances of unschooling, what I really do is I just give them permission to think, oh, it's okay, this is doable. Just giving yourself that permission. If you want to contact me and me to give you that permission, I can, but sometimes you don't need it from an external person. Second thing is that I think that going up against the system is something that didn't end for me when I was leaving high school. I think that the decision not to become a doctor, to not go to law school, I've felt, in many areas of my life, pressure to conform to a certain standard of living. And I think that I've been successful in rebuking that because unschooling did give me that inner strength that you were talking about, that confidence to sort of go up against that system and figure out what makes me really happy. And that community, as so many people here on this panel have discussed, is really incredibly vital so that you feel supported. And lastly, I just want to say, be humble. Know that you don't know everything, and that's okay. Just try to avoid generalizing, especially when talking about communities and large groups of people that you might not have direct experience with. Know that it's okay not to know the answers all the time. And again, just give yourself that permission to learn. And that's, I think, the best advice I can give.
Thank you, everybody. Oh, go ahead. Stephen,
I was going to add something to Monica, what Monica said. I can really relate a lot because I was a very, very studious student when I was in middle school. I don't think of myself as oh, I know every, I feel that I kind of was on the same path as well. I could have been, just studying every single day of my waking life, 8 hours and just going after school, cram schools and just studying. But I think it's a good decision that for myself that I chose not to take this path. Even though there was a lot of pressure to do it, and I'm still learning, and I hope that I think I will live a good life for myself, because I'm somewhat developing connections online with other people, and I feel that I should probably do a better job of reaching out to people more and just being honest about myself, and being honest about my vulnerabilities, and my issues with life, my struggles, my inner thoughts.
Well, I'm so honored that you were able to share all that with us tonight, Stephen and Siren and Monica and John. Thank you. You guys have been an amazing panel. I learned so much. And please forgive me if I'm saying I didn't even think of the word that I'm trying to access right now. But if I'm saying that I'm anti-school, I'm not anti-school. I'm anti the oppression that people feel internally when they're in. Some people feel internally when they're in school. School is not a good fit for everyone, and I acknowledge and recognize that it is a good fit for some people. But if it's not a good fit for you, then please, by all means, do something about it. And that's what everybody has said on tonight's panel. So I just want to make sure that you know that that whatever path that you decide to take, it's your path and it's your choice. And if school is a good fit, stay. If it's not a good fit, do something about that. And community and support seems to be one of the biggest needs here as you're going through that. So hopefully this show will have added a little bit to the conversation, and the dialogue will be useful to somebody traveling down this path, as I know all of you are so inspirational. Thank you so much. And thank you, Nina, for putting together this panel. And also, thank you to Mel and Vicky over at Conscious Consumer Network. We're so incredibly grateful to have a space to broadcast. Finally, I just want to say, wherever you are and whatever you do, continue to do it for the love of learning.
If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Mainstream media exists for the purposes of indoctrination and manipulation of public perception. The world of free and independent media is growing, and with the upsurge in information now available in the public domain, it has never been easier to access free and independent media. The exploration of this information resulted in an experimental project which would provide a fully supported space for researchers, whistleblowers, and seekers of all kinds to express themselves and educate the world. On the 1st of January 2015, Conscious Consumer Network was launched to the world. Nobody thought we would make it this far, but CCN is the longest running free and independent media network of its kind. CCN is a unique collaboration of hearts and souls, bringing you information from different perspectives to educate and inform. Since we started CCN, we have had only one desire: the pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world, and this has not changed. Having overcome many challenges over the last 2 years, CCN is here to stay, and we've got great things lined up for 2017. Help keep CCN on the air by supporting the 2017 Network Support Fund.